What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going to do a live stream to help you prepare for week 2. We will be talking start-sit decisions. First, I'll be going through guys that are under 40% rostered in ESPN formats, generally representative of your typical fantasy football league, guys who are still out there who could be players that you may want to play, either as injury replacement or if you just need somebody in a pinch for this week. So I'll go over those guys at each and every position. Then what we will do is we will talk start sit for each individual game. I will also be answering fan questions throughout as well. So if you have any questions in this chat, just let me know within the comment section of this video. Let me know what type of questions you have for each of the games coming up, guys that you're thinking about starting, sitting, different decisions that you have. This video is specifically designed for answering your questions. So your questions will take precedence over what I'm talking about. Just ask them in the chat below. So I will just let everyone know as well in the chat, in case you're tuning in as well, to ask your questions in this video, and I will answer them. All right. So first of all, I just want to recap Thursday night real quick. This will be a pretty short recap of that video. Green Bay, interestingly, so I was wrong about Tucker Kraft. I did not see him having the amount of volume that he did have in this game. I thought things would be a little bit more dispersed in terms of who Green Bay's actual top receiving target is. And for the wide receivers, that's been pretty much true this season. But by far their most reliable pass catcher that Jordan Love has relied upon is Tucker Kraft. Had over 100 yards in this game, 2 touchdowns. I don't really know if I see that type of performance sustaining itself throughout the season. He's currently the tight end 1 on the season. Granted, that's because he's had 2 games and everybody else has had 1 game for the most part, other than the Commanders. But still, this is an incredibly impressive performance of what we've seen from Tucker Kraft so far, and he's definitely put himself into the top 12 of tight ends, probably rest of season. So it'll be interesting to see if he can maintain this kind of pace that he's going at right now. I think it honestly might be better if you could try to sell him off of this and get somebody that is a more prestigious tight end and somebody that I projected just generally be a better tight end for fantasy football. But still, this will be interesting to see how this tracks for the Packers moving forward. I still really love Josh Jacobs as their primary option on this team, and he is heavily involved just as he always is. There's really not a threat to him in the backfield to take over more snaps other than Josh Jacobs. So that's a pretty consistent thing that we've seen with the Packers so far this season. But Jordan Love, I still maintain, is right around in that range of quarterback, 10 to 15 range with upside to get into the top 10 in fantasy football. For the Commanders, the Austin Eckler injury is pretty rough. I will be talking running back replacements, and there will be one of the ones that I'll be talking about when we look to our week 3 preview of guys to pick up among the Commanders' backfield. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt takes a huge step forward as somebody that's going to be replacing Austin Eckler's minutes, but still take a look at the guys like Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols, because those are the ones that are probably going to take more of the pass catching work. Specifically, McNichols is the one that I like to kind of replace the PPR role on third down that Austin Eckler had on this team prior to his injury. Not too concerned with Jaden Daniels' MRI. I think that will pretty much resolve itself. And again, Zach Ertz, another very underrated tight end that I loved going into the season. He continues to play well. Had 18.7 points in fantasy this Thursday. Got another touchdown. He's one of the more underrated tight ends, and at his draft capital that you were taking him, he's one of the better values that you could have gotten, aside from Tucker Kraft, who was also drafted pretty late too. All right, so we will go into my under 40% starts, stashes, and an under 10% start that you could do if you're in a deep league or a real pinch for this week. And my under 40% start for this week, I will be doing 2 because one of these players I used last week because of the matchup, but he gets another great matchup this week. and that is Trevor Lawrence. He is 36.4% rostered. He gets Cincinnati this week. He was disappointing against Carolina, though. And I think part of that is because of the rain delay that they had with the Lightning. That kind of threw off the rhythm of that game for him. And Cincinnati, I think that matchup is going to give you a better performance from Trevor Lawrence. I like him to get the ball down the field a little bit more to Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter. Brenton Strange, I expect, will have a good game. He'll be somebody that I'll be talking about in a little bit in this video too. So I do think this is a good opportunity for you to stream Trevor Lawrence for this game, and I really like him in this matchup against Cincinnati. And another name that I would recommend starting that is under 40% rostered, Geno Smith of Las Vegas. He gets the Chargers on Monday night. This is a good Monday night replacement if you have any type of guys that you're thinking about starting there. Like maybe you have CJ Stroud and you're not really sure about starting him. I think that this is a better matchup to go with. If you're looking at Geno Smith or CJ Stroud on their Monday night games, I would be going with Geno Smith personally. We saw them get the ball down the field a lot in week one. They were extremely effective at getting multiple different receivers involved. It looks like Brock Bowers is going to play, so that should help Geno Smith as well. And again, I think that in this particular matchup against the Chargers, they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. They're going to need to be relying on him. I think this is going to be an opportunity where he should give you around a top 15 performance. So if you're looking at either a deep league or a 2-quarterback league, Geno Smith would be in my lineup. So stashes, we will be going through 2 quarterbacks today. We'll give you a little bit more of a bonus on the quarterbacks, stashes that I would want to have on my roster that are under 40% rostered in ESPN leagues. We will be starting with Daniel Jones. He is 20% rostered, coming off a top 3 fantasy performance in week 1. He gets Denver this week, though. I would not be wanting to play him against Denver despite what we saw to open this season. Daniel Jones, I do like his potential in fantasy, especially if they can get him to be running the ball like he did in week 1 against Miami. But this Denver Broncos defense is the best in football, in my opinion. And I think that the Colts are going to kind of come back to earth a little bit in this game. I like Daniel Jones' potential, especially considering the teams that he's getting in a week in and week out basis in the AFC South, which is one of the weaker divisions in the NFL. So Daniel Jones will be useful for fantasy, but in this particular matchup, I'm not going to be putting him out there this week. And then a bonus stash. This guy is under 5% rostered at 4.5%, but it's looking like he could be the starter very soon for the Giants, and it is Jackson Dart. So Russell Wilson kind of came into the season with a short lease. He is already kind of at the end of it, and it's only week 2. So if you are in the deep leagues, the 2-quarterback leagues, you want to make sure that you have Jackson Dart rostered before he is grabbed by somebody else and before he takes over the starting opportunity in New York. Because once they give it to him, they're probably not going to give it to anybody else. There's a chance they may go to Jameis first and then Jackson Dart to kind of, let the rookie kind of ease in on his time. But considering that this team has not gotten off to a good start, it's looking like we're going to be seeing him sooner rather than later. And then an under 10% start. This individual gets a nice matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, coming back home to where he won a Super Bowl. He threw the ball 47 times in this last game against Cincinnati. He gets the Baltimore Ravens today. I think Joe Flacco is, again, somebody that I would consider starting for this week at under 10% rostered. I think he's got top 15 upside this week, personally. This Baltimore defense currently is the 32nd ranked defense. I think a lot of that is because they were playing Josh Allen. But at the same time, Baltimore either way is probably going to be winning this game by a pretty substantial margin. And if the Browns are going to stay in this game, they're going to need Flacco to continue to air the ball down the field just like he did against the Bengals in this past week. He did have 2 interceptions, but if you did watch that game, they were deflected off the receiver's hands. So they weren't really Joe Flacco's fault. I think that in this particular matchup, I think Flacco will give you right around 10 PPR points, and I really like his potential in this system to have a good game this weekend. Running back under 40% start for me is Kareem Hunt. He is 22.4% rostered against Philadelphia. I don't love the running back situation on the waiver wires right now. It's pretty much a lot of guys that are on the fringe of players that you want to have as handcuffs, not necessarily as guys you're expecting to get big minutes. Of course, you want to see if Judkins is there because he may have been dropped in some leagues, but now at this point, he's probably picked up. Hunt is one of the only guys that is on waivers that I think has legitimate opportunity to get 10 to 15 carries a game for the Chiefs. There are a lot of just uncertainty in this backfield. Isaiah Pacheco was kind of the favorite this season, but he really did not look good at the end of last season. So I was skeptical, even despite his injury that he had on the broken leg. And going right into week one, they dispersed the carries just like I was anticipating across multiple different running backs. Kareem Hunt, I think there's a good chance against Philadelphia that they're going to use him quite a bit. And I think there's a good chance he gets a touchdown against the Eagles in the Sunday afternoon game. So I'd be starting Kareem Hunt if he is out there, but you have to really not have a lot of great options if you're going to be going that way. Stashes. I'm going to give you two. One stash, and again, the big takeaway among running back stashes under 40% rostered is get the handcuff to your guy, your elite RB1. If you have McCaffrey, you should have Brian Robinson. If you have Saquon Barkley, you should have, well, probably now Tank Bigsby. You want to have Tyler Algier. If you have Bijan Robinson, this is extremely important because there's going to be injuries that happen throughout the season, and you want to cover yourself so you're not losing all your production. But the one handcuff to me that I think has a chance to actually be the starter, just non-injury related, is Jadon Blue. We have not seen him yet. He was injured in week one, and it's unclear if he's going to actually play in this game against the Giants. But he is 34.3% rostered. He gets the he's somebody that they want to go with Javonte Williams right now, but I do see a potential later on. They may go to the 5th round rookie running back Jadon Blue. He's the one guy, like I said, that I think actually could take over the backfield without either Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders getting injury. Injury-related stash that's pretty underrated, though, is DJ Giddens. He is the backup for Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis, and Taylor kind of had a neck injury that banged him up last week. If that continues to flare itself up and it causes him to miss time, DJ Giddens, I think, is somebody that can go in and still get the majority of the workload that Jonathan Taylor got. So Giddens to me I just want to highlight him because he's a stash that a lot of people don't know, but somebody that I think could really be very effective if given the opportunity. And he only has Jonathan Taylor in front of him in terms of, he doesn't have multiple running backs to compete with, and Jonathan Taylor is already injured. So this is just somebody I want to give you a heads up on because I think there's a real chance that he could be heavily involved. And then an under 10% start for this week at 9% roster getting the Seattle Seahawks is Kenneth Gainwell. So Seattle is currently ranked as the 32nd defense. So Gainwell was a pretty popular pickup, and I don't love him as much as Hunt as somebody I would want to start. But still, Seattle, they were ranked 32nd because they were going up against McCaffrey, who was pretty much getting a carry. It's seemingly every other play in that game. And McCaffrey was heavily involved in the passing game as well. So a lot of these points come because of PPR and just the sheer volume that San Francisco gave towards the running backs in that game, which is why Seattle is ranked San Francisco is ranked as low as they are. Why Seattle is ranked as low as they are as a defense against running backs. But so that some of that value will marginalize, but the argument for Kenneth Gainwell is that he is a PPR monster. And this is a guy that I think will be able to get a few receptions in this game. So if you're really in a pinch, I think he could give you a good floor of around 5 points, 5 to 10 if things go well, and there's a good chance he could pop off for more in this game against Seattle. Wide receivers. This is one of my favorite guys that you could pick up and play for this week. It is Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots. He is only 23.8% rostered. They get Miami this weekend, and Boutte was the number one receiver for the Pats this past week. He had 8 targets, and on that he had 6 for 103 and no touchdowns. But the fact that he did get 8 targets, we saw him already out target Stephon Diggs. His amount of volume was a lot more effective than what was going to Demario Douglas. And they get Miami this weekend, which just allowed Daniel Jones to go off. They have one of the worst pass defenses from what we've seen in week 1. I think Boutte is somebody that you could pick up on waivers and put into your flex, and you will be satisfied with the value that he gives you. He is a great option for me, not only for this week, but long term, because this team truly needs a wide receiver one. And we've gone back and forth between different guys who could do this. I've been a little bit more bullish on Demario Douglas, but he's not really lived up to it. And what we've seen from week 1 is that it's actually Boutte who is the one getting the rapport with Drake May, who is getting the X minutes. Guys like that who are looking like he could be the number one on this team. And if he could manage to stay in that role throughout the season, this is an extremely valuable pickup for you for fantasy purposes. And then a bonus start. This individual as well is under 40% rostered. Calvin Austin. He is another good option that you can consider. I don't like him as much because he's more entrenched as a wide receiver 2 on Pittsburgh versus Boutte has a chance to be a wide receiver 1 on his team. But Austin got a touchdown against New York this past week. He's 4 for 70 and 1 on 6 targets. Gets Seattle this week in that same game, Pittsburgh and Seattle that we talked about earlier. Not a bad option, but not as good as Boutte in my opinion. 2 stashes. We'll give you some more guys on stashes that you can keep an eye on. Brandon Ayuk, I bring him up because he is now under 40% rostered at 38.3%. And this is a guy that you would be stashing for IR purposes. I don't love Brandon Ayuk as someone that I think is a wide receiver 2 quality player that some people view him as. I think this is going to be somebody who could be best in the flex at best this season. But still, you look at the situation in San Francisco. Kittle is injured. Juwan Jennings is injured. You know, their receiving core is pretty beat up as it is. They're relying on guys right now like Ricky Pearsall, who is good, but then after that, you're dropping off to like Sky Moore. So things are that team is, the amount of injuries they have is just crazy. But that just sets up Brandon Ayuk to potentially come in week 6 and be an effective receiver because there's a void of guys that they need to fill right now. So I see Brandon Ayuk as somebody that you could stash on your IR if you have him available there, and is somebody that you could hold up through week 6 when he's expected to return. Maybe you could flip him for value there when he is coming back, but if not, he's somebody that you could have on your bench and could give you some good value in your flex around the times that the bye weeks start kicking in the middle of the fantasy football season. And then another stash I want to mention, this guy is under 10% rostered at 7.2%. Alec Iomanor. Pretty weak stat game from the sense of, receptions and yards this past week. He was 2 for 13. But what I like is 7 targets. And particularly on this team, Calvin Ridley struggled with drops last week. If that continues, this team may turn more to the rookie Iomanor, who kind of fits the timeline with Cam Ward a little bit better than Calvin Ridley for one. And 2, this team needs somebody to step up as their second wide receiver after Ridley. So it's not the best of matchups this week going up against the Rams, but I do like this involvement here that you could stash him on your bench and see what happens, because I think that Iomanor will be extremely relevant for fantasy as we get into the second half of the season particularly. And then my under 10% start for this week, he is 9.7% rostered. used to be 97% rostered years ago, but now on the Ravens, he is trying to make a last-minute attempt at a Super Bowl in his career. DeAndre Hopkins, 9.7% rostered. He got a touchdown last week against Buffalo. This team, Mark Andrews is a little bit disappointing as a number one target on this team, or excuse me, as the second target after Flowers. Andrews is pretty disappointing. Hopkins actually kind of was a little bit more effective than Rashad Bateman in terms of being the second wide receiver on this team in terms of his targets and his looks in the red zone. I like DeAndre Hopkins to potentially get a touchdown this week against Cleveland. You'd have to be really desperate to put him in there, but if you're in a pinch, you need somebody to play. Hopkins gets a good matchup against the Browns, and I think that he will be effective in this game. Next, we go to the tight ends under 40% rostered. This is a little bit of a cheat because this guy's 44% roster, but still, if he's out there, I would be looking up to pick him up and play him. And it's Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints. He had 8 for 87, no touchdowns, but 11 targets. And this is a team, again, that we've talked about. They need somebody to be the wide receiver one on this team because they don't really have anybody stepping up into that void. Johnson gets San Francisco this week, which, you may look at the numbers and you may think that San Francisco is a great defense against tight ends because they're like top 5 in the rankings. But if you actually look at the game, Seattle's starting tight end is Elijah Arroyo. They don't really have a very great tight end room there. So I wouldn't be scared off by this matchup of what we've seen already in week 1. I would be starting Juwan Johnson this week. I think he's still going to be heavily involved, and he's a great player to pick up and to stream at the tight end position this week. Another great one to pick up and stream is Brenton Strange. I mentioned him earlier. That matchup against Cincinnati is very intriguing. And if you look at the Cincinnati game in particular against the Browns, Brenton Strange had, Harold Fannin and David Njoku were both heavily targeted and both had pretty good stat lines for fantasy because of that's a weak spot in the Cincinnati defense. So if Jacksonville can get all those receptions and targets to Brenton Strange, this is going to give him a great floor for fantasy. And then if he gets a touchdown, it could be even better. I think he flirts with the top 10 with top 5 upside this week. Brenton Strange is somebody that I would pick up under 40% rostered at 26% rostered in ESPN leagues and play for this week. And then a stash for me in that same Browns game I mentioned earlier, Harold Fannin Jr. He got heavily targeted in this game. I do want to see a little bit more of a sample size, though, to see if that was an outlier or if he truly is taking the targets away from David Njoku. He gets Baltimore this week, and there's a good chance that they could get him involved simply because of the need to pass to multiple different receivers, as I mentioned earlier. But this is somebody that should be rostered. He's only 25.3% rostered in ESPN leagues and very well could be taking over as the tight end one on this team. So we'll need to see a little bit more of a sample size to me to actually put him in my lineups to start. But still, this is a good player that should be rostered and could be a useful chip in trades too, depending on how he does this week. Jake Tonjes at 2.3% is another stash. This, to me, you'd have to be desperate to go into the depths of trying to get to Jake Tonjes as my starter. If there's a lot of other options while Kittle is out than to just go to his own backup. But I think that this is still intriguing to see if he's utilized in the same way as Kittle. And then on top of the fact that this team already has a lot of injuries. So I'm stashing him for this week, but I'm still keeping my eye on him and trying to roster him if I can at 2.3%. My under 10% start among the tight ends this week is Dalton Schultz, 7.1% on Monday night. So Brock Bowers is expected to play, but if he does not play, then I would be going with Schultz this week. Dalton Schultz gets a pretty good matchup against Tampa Bay. They gave up quite a bit of targets and volume to Kyle Pitts, and I think that there's a chance that Schultz could kind of fit in as that third receiving option on this team and give you a pretty good floor for fantasy. Again, it's not going to be anything great necessarily, but I mentioned him because he's specifically in that Monday night game where if Bowers does not play, then you could go to Schultz as his replacement. The other option you could look to replace Bowers is Michael Mayer on his own team at 1.9%. After Bowers went out, Mayer had 4 catches in this game, and I think that there's a chance that he is going to be used in a similar system where they involve the tight end to replace the Bowers minutes. Mayer is capable. He's had some flashes of good games at times throughout his short career, and I think in this matchup against the Chargers, we could see him heavily involved should Bowers not play. The defense pickup for this week that is under 40% rostered, Dallas at 11.1% gets the Giants. We also have Kansas City as my stash. They are 12.8% rostered. So Dallas against the Giants. I want to mention that the Commanders played very well against the Giants in that game earlier this season, in week 1. So I do think that Dallas, despite the publicity around losing Parsons, they actually played pretty well against the Eagles, and I think that they will give you a solid performance in this game against one of their other divisional rivals. Kansas City at Philadelphia. I bring this up because Kansas City at 12.8% rostered is available, and they have a rough matchup going up against Philly for this week. So I would not be playing them in week 2, but week 3, they are getting the New York Giants. So this is a great opportunity to pick up Kansas City and get ahead of the waiver wire while they get a great matchup in week 3 against, maybe it's Russell Wilson, maybe it's Jameis, which is probably even better for fantasy purposes with the amount of interceptions he throws. But still, this is a great defense to pick up heading into week 3 by beating the waiver wire. Stash Kansas City for this week. And then my under 10% start, New Orleans at 1%. If you're really desperate for a defense, there's a chance that New Orleans could actually be very good this week against Mac Jones and the San Francisco 49ers. I would have to really be desperate in a situation where, I have my defense is the Eagles going up against the Chiefs, or like, insert other great matchup defense-wise. But so you'd really have to be desperate. But there's a chance that Mac Jones could be turning the ball over quite often. He has been a very erratic quarterback throughout his career. New Orleans is a capable enough defense that I think they could actually give you a solid floor. Although I'm not expecting anything spectacular, they could give you a better overall performance than what you may get from some of these defenses that are rated a little more highly, but you have tough matchups. And then my kicker, under 40% to start for this week, Matt Prater, 31.9% for Buffalo. He is replacing Tyler Bass, who is injured currently, and he has a matchup this week against the Jets. So I think that at least while Tyler Bass is out, Matt Prater will be an effective kicker that you can pick up and play most weeks. Gets a pretty good matchup this week. He had 12 points last week. So, yeah, I'm never stashing a kicker. I never roster any more than 2 kickers on a team. That's not a good strategy to have. But under 10%, my start for this week is Daniel Carlson, and that is because he's playing on Monday night. So what you could do in this game is let's look at your opponent and see who is playing in that matchup, because Daniel Carlson with the Monday night game could be very useful for you as a placeholder for rostering one of your handcuff running backs if your opponent is having all of his guys play today. So if you go into that game and you already have won the matchup and you don't need Daniel Carlson as your kicker, then what you could do is you could drop him and then pick up your choice of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Houston Texans, Chargers, or the Raiders backup running back. And then if there isn't any type of injury that happens, then you can hold on to them. Doesn't have to be a running back. It could be another flex of interest. One of these guys I've mentioned in this video, maybe. But Daniel Carlson is a useful tool that you can do to do that, depending on how your day goes today. You may not need to use him, and then you could use that spot to pick up a bench player that could help you heading into week 3. So this is a useful trick that I like to tell people that you can use to help you in fantasy football for these opening just to give you yourself some more flexibility. Okay, so that is it for my under 10% or excuse me, my under 40% starts, stashes, and then my under 10% starts for the week. So we will get into some fan questions next in this video, and then what we will do is we will go into each individual game and go through the guys that I like to either start or sit. So we will go into the questions. So like I said, once again, if you do have any questions on this channel in this live video, ask them. We have about an hour and a half until game day. So ask any questions that you got, and the priority will go to answering those questions. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Ask any questions that you have in this video, and I will get to them right away. So a couple questions that we have. Do we think that we will see Justin Herbert perform the same way he did all year? This is from Jack Benner. I think that he will be in the top 10 to 15 range among quarterbacks. He's going to have some matchups that lend him to being a must start. Side note, Juwan Jennings is active for week 2, so we'll see how that goes. I'm not expecting big things from him, but just got the notification on him. But back to Justin Herbert. He's got top 10 to 15 upside among the quarterback position, and I think he has certain matchups where he can be in the top 5, depending on the opponent. But at the same time, there's other quarterbacks that I like over him for a reason, and I think there are going to be games where the Chargers are going to be more heavily relying on the run game than Herbert necessarily. But still, this was an incredibly encouraging sign from what we saw in week 1. He played one of the best games of his career, arguably. So I like him moving forward. I would advise, though, when he does have a game like this, it may actually be a good idea to consider trading him and seeing if you can get a haul at another position of need. If you let's say that Herbert is your backup and your starter is like Josh Allen or Burrow or something like those guys up in the top elite among quarterbacks. It actually may be worth trying to trade Herbert now while he's got a great week 1 performance under his belt. Question from On Their Head. Is trading Charbonnet and Ingram for Tyler Warren an overpay? For me, that is not an overpay. I really like Tyler Warren moving forward. I loved his involvement of what we saw in week 1. Evan Ingram, to me, is a highly notarized tight end in terms of a lot of people liked his draft cap, liked him going into the season. He had a high draft capital. So he comes with a lot of name value, but I don't really love his outlook for production personally on this team. He's already got a calf injury for 1. 2, this team likes, aside from Courtland Sutton, who's pretty locked in as the 1 on the Broncos, they like to spread the ball around to other guys. Charbonnet, I do like but I would like him a lot more if he was the only running back there. And it's looking like this situation with him and Kenneth Walker is going to be a pretty even split between carries. So because of that, I would honestly try to go with Tyler Warren, especially if this is any kind of keeper or dynasty format. Tyler Warren, to me, is one of the best assets at tight end, and I think he's got potential to crack the top 5 this year, as crazy as that is. Quinshon Judkins has been upgraded to healthy as a side note as well. Not expecting big things from him. I would not be playing Judkins this week personally. I'd want to see just at least sample with him before I feel comfortable playing him. There's a chance. I think there's a better chance that he has almost closer to 0 fantasy points than he has a startable quality game personally. But I do love him this season. I just don't want to play him in week 2. But yeah, I like Tyler Warren. I would make that trade to give Charbonnet and Ingram for Tyler Warren in a trade. This next question is from Kazin671. Looking for an RB2 this week. I have Kenneth Walker, Judkins, Charbonnet, a couple of guys we've already talked about a little bit, Caleb Johnson, RJ Harvey, and Ollie Gordon as my handcuff for Achane, who's my RB1. So you're not playing Ollie Gordon for one. As among the RB2s, if this format is a PPR, I would go with Kenneth Walker. If it's not a PPR, then what I would do is I would go with Zach Charbonnet. So this is kind of an interesting question in terms of there's a lot of players that have interesting outlooks this season, but specifically for week 2, I would go Kenneth Walker. He's somebody that I'm actually a little bit lower on in terms of his value rest of season. I think that Charbonnet is eventually going to take over this backfield. But RJ Harvey to me is in discussion for that start to me. I just don't go there personally because RJ Harvey, I don't know what his carries are going to look like against the Colts. I think that the Colts defense actually did very well against Achane and the Dolphins in week 1. And I think that RJ Harvey could have a pretty pedestrian performance. So if it's not something involving a lot of points, then a lot of receptions, and if he doesn't get a touchdown, he's probably somebody I would sit. Caleb Johnson, it's looking like he's going to be eased into this season slowly. So he was somebody that I would sit, and same with Judkins. So Walker is not somebody I feel super excited about starting, but with PPR, there's a chance that he's going to get some catches in this game against the Steelers. Should be pretty effective enough. I would go with Walker among those guys. Question in the live chat from Dylan O'Shea. Should I try and trade JCM away? I'm not convinced that he will be a great RB. I think you can, but you're also not going to get the best return coming off a week 2 performance like he just had. I think that he's somebody that I think that if anything, the Eckler injury can help his stock. But I think what's more going to happen with this particular team is that they're going to use Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt on the early downs, and then they're probably going to transition to Jeremy McNichols as the second, or as the more Austin Eckler type role as the pass catcher. If I was going to package Diggs and Henderson, what is the best RB or wide receiver I could get? So I think if you're going to give up Henderson, that's one of the better running back prospects that you can have. So I think if you're going to try to do that, what I would recommend, you could probably try to swing for among running backs. I would try to go for somebody like Genty or Hampton, who I like just a little bit more than Henderson this season. I think that's somebody I would look at in the running backs. Among wide receivers, I would look to the range of guys in the wide receiver 2 range. I'm talking about the guys like, the heavily targeted volume receivers who didn't necessarily have a great game in week 1, but should still be great this season. I'm thinking guys like Cortland Sutton. I'm thinking guys like Ted McMillan could be in that discussion as well. I think if you can get guys like Nico Collins or AJ Brown coming off of pretty poor week 1s, I think that's a package I would recommend giving for that. So those are some good options to consider. I wouldn't give up on Henderson though. It would really take a lot for me to try to sell him though. In terms of your question earlier, though, about JCM, though, Dylan, I think there's a good chance that Washington may actually try to trade for a running back. I would be interested to see if Alvin Kamara is their target, though. So that'd be something I'd be looking at personally. But for me, I don't think you're really necessarily getting the best return after week 2. Field the options and see what you can get if you are looking to trade him. But I would feel that he has a better chance of putting up better numbers next week against Vegas. I think that he's going to have a better performance there, and I think that's probably the ideal time to try to trade him after week 3. If you have any other questions, Dylan, or if anyone else in the chat comes in and has any questions, just ask them below. I'm going to stop what I'm talking about to answer your questions. So it doesn't have to be about start sit. It could be about dynasty, about roster construction, trades, etc. So just ask below, and I'd be happy to help answer your questions. So we will go to the individual matchups, and I will talk start sit among each of the respective positions that are out there that you could consider to play for this week. So we will be getting right into it. The first matchup that I'm going to be talking about is the Ravens and the Cleveland Browns. I mentioned Joe Flacco as somebody that I would like, as somebody that you could start that is under 10% roster for this week. He, to me, is around that top 15 quarterback range because I think this team is going to be passing the ball frequently. And Flacco can give you a good enough floor that you can be comfortable with in a 2-quarterback league that is highly available in leagues. And from Dylan, I like Henderson. Yeah, I agree. Henderson to me is somebody that I really love for this season. Who are your other running backs again? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head who the other guys that you have are. I think that if he's your best running back, then I would probably try to hold him probably regardless. But if you do have other really good options at running back, he is an interesting trade consideration candidate as well. Yeah, the Pats offense, though, I would not necessarily judge it after 1 week because as much as people are kind of saying in the media that oh, maybe Drake May's not good, maybe this offense is Vrabel's over his head or whatever. It's still just 1 week, and they do have a new coaching scheme. Josh McDaniels coming back. I personally am not super worried about the Pats offense in terms of Henderson necessarily. Maybe a team success, it may not be the best for the season like a lot of people were projecting, but I do think Henderson is going to be pretty involved on this team because Ramondre Stevenson is just, you kind of know what you're getting with him. He gives you a good early down floor, but he's not really an explosive player that I'm super worried about. Henderson, I do think is going to get more involved as the season goes along. So in terms of his fantasy production, I'm not really worried about that. Maybe the team, the Pats, might be a little bit more concerning long term. Tough question. How would you rank your top 10 or 15 tight ends right now? Top 2 are still Bowers and McBride. I agree with that. Kittle is injured, but after that, it's hard to tell. Yeah. It is really interesting this season. The tight ends are a lot more involved than what we've seen in years past. I'm not sure if that's just the offense is getting settled in, but I'd be really interested to see if week 2, if we continue to see a high target volume, because the way this season has gone, you've almost been better off waiting to get a tight end on waivers than trying to take Bowers or McBride early on. I'm not sure if that trend will continue, but that's just what it's looked like so far in week 1. But just jotting down my top 10 right now, I would still probably put Kittle 3 because of the fact that he is, even though he is injured, he does give you probably the best upside in terms of this team's lack of healthy receivers, the system, and Kittle's experience throughout his career. He's probably still my number 3. My number 4, going through the guys off the top of my head, probably Laporta. And then I honestly think there's a chance Tyler Warren could flirt with top 5 at this point. I know that probably sounds crazy, but he is heavily involved on that team. And in week 1, he already got, I believe, 8 targets. It was either 7 or 8. I can't remember which one exactly. But I think that Warren is definitely top 5 consideration. Then I would probably start looking more into the Tucker Kraft range after that. I don't want to overreact necessarily what we've seen the first 2 weeks, but I think he's definitely warranting top 10 right now. Then after that, I'd still probably put Kelsey top 10, even though I don't love that long-term outlook. Other guys, so that's 7 right there. Then I think because of the volume that we've seen from some of these other guys, I think that you'd have to look at, let me just kind of peruse some of the other teams real quick just to kind of get an idea of, see if I'm missing out on any tight ends. I don't really love necessarily what we've seen with like Dalton Kincaid. I don't think that that's really sustainable. I'm looking at with the tight ends. Look at the guys that are getting a lot of targets on their individual team and see if that goes long term. Hawkinson, I think, is still top 10, even though I don't love that like projection long term. I do think that you can also make an argument for guys like Jawan Johnson getting into that top 10 just because of the volume we've seen with him. But I think the general point is that there's a lot of tight ends that you can look at right now with a lot of volume. I want to see how things go for another week. But in terms of like, I'm just going to list my top 10 right now that I have. It would be Bowers 1. It would be McBride 2. Then it would be Kittle, despite the injury, because I'm looking more at like the team health, as I said. Then for number 4 for me, it would be Laporta. Then I would say Warren 5 is the next one that I would want. 6 would be Kraft. 7 would be Hawkinson. 8, because of the volume and teen opportunity, I would probably look Jawan Johnson. I know that looks like kind of crazy right now, but that team does not have a lot of other guys to go to. And if Jawan Johnson can keep up that pace, he will be top 10 on the season. Then I would put Hawkinson in there and then Kelsey. So that's 10 right there. But yeah, I will be adjusting my rankings as the season goes along. That is a great question, though. This tight end position is going to be interesting because Fannin has a chance to get in there to replace Njoku, who we all viewed as top 10 tight end. Zach Ertz is flirting with top 10 on the season potentially. So yeah, great question, Dylan. That'll be something to really monitor as we move through this season. Back to the Browns and Ravens. What do you do with the Dylan Sampson, Jerome Ford, Quinshon Judkins situation? I would be looking to play Dylan Sampson if it's PPR because he got 8 catches this past week, and I think some of that's going to replicate into this next game. Long-term, Judkins is the guy to have on this team, but as I mentioned earlier in this video, I'm not playing Judkins at all in this game. I think there's a better chance he has 0 points than he gives you a respectable starting performance just because at the end of the day, this guy didn't really participate in camp, and he practiced with this team for like 2 weeks, and then now he's active for week 2. I just don't really know what his opportunity is going to be and don't want to risk that in my starting lineup. Jerry Jeudy, I would start against the Baltimore Ravens. Cedric Tillman is in the fringe as well as somebody that I would consider playing, but there are better options out there personally that I would not necessarily lock him in. Jeudy, I would want to feel comfortable playing, though. I would be locking him into my starting lineup. And Njoku and Fannin, what do you do there? I would probably be looking for other options for both of these guys. I think that Brenton Strange he's the guy that I mentioned earlier in this video as my under 40% start of the week. I would be playing him over both of these guys. As I mentioned earlier, Strange gets Cincinnati, and part of this split with Njoku and Fannin could just be the reason both of them had so many targets is because they were playing the Bengals, which is a terrible defense against tight ends. So I want to see how they do against the Ravens, how this target split continues to develop in this game, because I think that'll tell you a lot about whether or not this is Njoku's tight end room and it's his job to lose, or Fannin is actually taking it over, in which that really bumps up Harold Fannin's value. But he's somebody, again, I mentioned in the tight ends that should be stashed in all leagues. He's only 25.3% rostered in ESPN leagues. So if he's out there, I would pick him up and just put him on my bench if you have the ability to do that on your team. Do not play the Browns kicker. He missed like a 27-yard field goal or whatever that was this week. I'm kind of surprised he kept his job. And I would not be playing the Browns defense either. Although the Browns defense might actually be underrated because they did pretty well against the Bengals considering what our expectations were. For the Ravens, Lamar Jackson is locked in and starting as he is every week. Same with Derrick Henry. Can you play Justice Hill this week? I would probably say no. But he is somebody that should be looked at in certain matchups. Zay Flowers, I would be playing. I really liked what I saw from him. He was somebody that I think was going way too late considering his opportunity as a number 1 wide receiver. He was going generally in the 5th round, and he broke out in this game. So I'm interested to see how he does because he is kind of up and down throughout his short career so far. And the Browns shut down Chase and Higgins this past week. So Flowers, I feel like he's still going to be good enough for fantasy, but I'm not expecting the huge performance that we saw against Buffalo in week 1. Bateman is on the fringe of rostering. I would not be playing him this week. Hopkins under 10% rostered. I think you can play him if you're desperate. I mentioned him as my under 10% start, but that's more so because of just the other options that are out there who are under 10% rostered comparatively. But Hopkins, I think there's a chance that he could actually be the second target on this team, crazy as that sounds. Not much else to mention at the wide receiver here. Mark Andrews is somebody I would be trying to sit. I would not be trying to cut Mark Andrews from my team. I am concerned, though, about his lack of involvement despite a 40-point game from week 1. But we saw the same thing from him last year where he started slowly, and then he ended up being very effective as the season progresses. So I'm not worried about him long-term, but I'd be trying to look somewhere else for week 1. If it's Harold Fannin or Mark Andrews, I'm probably going Fannin, to be honest with you. Tyler Loop, this is a great kicker for this week. And the Baltimore Ravens, this is another great defense. Okay, so we'll keep going through these individual matchups, but obviously if you have any questions in the chat, drop them. Doesn't have to be about these games. It could be about anything football related. I will answer those. And then I will continue. If not, if I don't get any questions, we'll continue with the individual game matchups. Next, we have the Cincinnati Bengals and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence, this is a good pickup and stream against Cincinnati. I think he will have a bounce back performance of what we saw in week 1. If we do see another 10-point performance like what we saw, though, when he gets Carolina and then Cincinnati, then I'm going to be getting a little bit concerned with him because we've now seen this is his 5th year or his 4th year? I can't really – I know he was drafted 21. 21, 22, 23, 24. Yeah, he's 5th year now. He's got 3 different systems, and if he has a bad performance in this one, I'm going to be starting to get pretty concerned with him. But I think this is a great matchup to play him, though. I think he's going to have a nice performance in Cincinnati. Brian Thomas Jr. will get involved. Travis Hunter, I think, will have a good game. And Brenton Strange as well, who is my under 10% tight end start of the week. Those are all guys that I would be playing for the Jags for this particular matchup against Cincinnati. Travis Etienne, I would be playing him as well. We just saw Dylan Sampson get 8 catches, and this is Travis Etienne's specialty is receptions in the backfield. He gets Cincinnati this week. They cleared more opportunity for him by trading Tank Bigsby to the Eagles earlier this week. Travis Etienne is one of the best starts that you could have among guys that are rostered, but probably on the fringe of whether or not you want to start them. I love Etienne as a start for this week if you have him available in one of your leagues. Bashul Tutin, I think he will get more opportunity, but I don't think I would want to play him. He's somebody that should definitely be rostered, though, in all formats because now that, Tank Bigsby is gone, Tutin is the handcuff on this team. He's a very similar type of player to Etienne in terms of his speed and his pass catching abilities. I think that he's somebody that should definitely be rostered, especially if you have Etienne. Brian Thomas, start him this week. Travis Hunter, start him this week. I was encouraged by his involvement early in this season because he is a little bit of a wild card just because he is going to be playing both ways. Like, what will his involvement be on offense both ways? But they are leaning more towards using him as an offensive player versus a defensive player, which is encouraging to see from a fantasy perspective. Diami Brown actually had a pretty solid game for the Jags. He's somebody on the fringe if you're in very deep leagues to consider playing, as especially a DFS. You really have to have not a lot of options though to go there, but I'm curious to monitor that situation because he's looking like he could be the 3rd preferred target on this team. Brenton Strange, tight end I mentioned earlier, he is a must start for me on at the tight end position against Cincinnati, under 26% rostered in ESPN formats. Brenton Strange is somebody that you could pick up and play for this week. Cam Little. This is another kicker that is not heavily rostered, but had a very good performance week 1. And he gets a nice matchup here against Cincinnati. I think Cam Little will continue to be effective in this game. Not playing the Jags defense. Although, again, they played pretty well against Carolina, so they could find their way to relevancy this season. We'll see how they do against Cincinnati, though. Joe Burrow, I'm playing. I'm not worried about that week 1 performance. They always start slow. I think it's more of a problem with coaching. I really just feel like I'm from Cincinnati, so I've followed the Bengals through the years. I'm more of a Commanders fan, though. But the Bengals are kind of like my AFC team in a way. But I just feel like Zach Taylor is just not a good coach. I don't really know why they've kept him as long as they have. But they always start the season slow, I think, because the coaching is just even in that Browns game, they made so many decisions that are just what are you doing? But I think that Joe Burrow will be fine, and you could start him again for this week. Chase Brown, I mentioned earlier in this week as my buy low candidate that I would be trying to start, or I'd be trying to trade for heading into this matchup against Jacksonville. And he had 21 carries this past week. He only amounted to about 12 to 13 fantasy points. But I really like Chase Brown as somebody that I can play for this week as well. Roster, Samaje Perine, Taj Brooks, if you have Brown as their handcuff. I probably prefer Brooks over Perine. Perine's more of the third down role, though. Those are in very deep leagues. Jamar Chase and Higgins, I'm playing both of them. And you can look to, Io Savas in the deep league formats to get involved against Jacksonville, but I probably would prefer to go more so at the tight end, look to Mike Gesicki there. Noah Fant got the touchdown last week, but I do feel that this is Gesicki's tight end room for the most part this season. This is a good matchup to stream Evan McPherson. I like him for this particular week. And then the Cincinnati Bengals defense, I would not be playing. We have about an hour until game day, so if you have any questions, drop them in the chat below. If not, we will continue to go through the games. We've got the Giants and the Cowboys. I'm not playing Russell Wilson this week. I know in sleeper, he's projected for 17 points, which is actually as much as Dak for the most part. But I just don't want to go Russell Wilson in this game. Tyrone Tracy's Scatabo, the backfield of the Giants. I would be trying to play someone else personally. If you are going to go one of the two, I would go Tracy. If you're looking at those Browns players like the Dylan Sampson, I would probably go Tracy over him. But I would not really feel great about doing that. But these are definitely guys that ETN, Tracy's about in the same range of being rostered as ETN, and ETN is a pretty easy start for me over Tyrone Tracy. Scatabo I like long-term this season, but I'm not playing him this week. I'm still holding him to kind of see how that situation develops. For the Giants receivers, Malik Neighbors I would be playing. This is another week where you could play Wan'Dale Robinson, and I think he will give you an effective floor. He is one of the best PPR players in fantasy in terms of just giving you a very consistent floor that if you're in deep leagues, you can put him in your flex and be happy with the result. And I think that's going to be the case again in this Dallas game. We did not really see Theo Johnson step up a lot. We didn't really see a ton of receptions in the backfield from Tracy in this past game. I think that as long as we still have the current situation here with Russell Wilson at quarterback, Robinson will be the wide receiver 2 on this team. From Paul, full PPR 14-man league, Warren or Travis Hunter at flex. Who is your other tight end? I'm curious there. Those are both good matchups. I probably would go Warren because of the target volume I was expected that he would get. But I'd like to see who your other tight end is that you're considering there as well. I like Travis Hunter, though, too, against Cincinnati. Probably would go Warren, though, personally. Oh, Jalen Warren. Okay. I'd probably go Travis Hunter, to be honest with you. I like that matchup against Cincinnati. I think that he's got a ton of big play upside um, going into that matchup. Jalen Warren, I like him, but that Seattle defense I think is pretty underrated. They held that game against San Francisco to pretty low scoring total. I think that Warren might be a little bit disappointing, and that Steelers offense in general might struggle against. I know they just put up 30 points, but I think Seattle's defense is actually pretty good. I would feel more comfortable with Travis Hunter in that particular choice, especially since this is PPR. Going back to the Giants and the Cowboys, if you got any other questions from anyone in the chat, drop it below and I will stop what I'm talking about to answer your questions. Yeah, that's thank you. You too. I appreciate it, Paul. And if you got any other questions, just let me know in the chat. Yeah, the Giants, we didn't really see any like Theo Johnson step up at all, but that's still a situation to monitor because they do need a second guy other than Neighbors to be involved in this offense. But it's still Robinson's to lose there. So Robinson for now is still getting the nod in the deep leagues, but we'll see how this develops with the other receivers there. Graham Gano, I would play somebody else, and the Giants defense, I'd go elsewhere. Dak Prescott, this is a good comeback week for him. He's a good trade for candidate if you can pull off any trades between now and the next hour. I think that he will have a much better performance here against the Giants. Javonte Williams, I think this is, again, another guy you could start. I would start Javonte Williams over Tracy in this game. Miles Sanders, I would not roster him personally. I would more try to roster Jadon Blue. I mentioned Blue earlier in this video as my stash that I would be trying to hold on to that is trying to pick up that is under 40% rostered. He's 34.3% rostered. And because we haven't really had a ton of running back injuries so far this season, the waivers are mostly guys that are backup running backs at this point that don't really have a ton of opportunities for seeing carries. But Jadon Blue is the one that could actually take over the backfield, in my opinion, without an injury happening. So at the receiver, you're playing CeeDee Lamb. I would play Pickens again, even though he didn't have a great week one performance. I was not high on George Pickens going into this season personally. But I do think you can play him in this particular matchup against the Giants, and he will be more effective. Turpin and Tolbert, that would not be playing those guys. Jake Ferguson, you can go that way, but there are better matchups like Brenton Strange personally. Like, I would probably still go Njoku or Fannin over Jake Ferguson. It's close though. I feel like Jake Ferguson is somebody I would probably try to go elsewhere if that was an option for me at tight end. Brandon Aubrey, you're playing, and the Cowboys defense, they are 11.1% rostered. Check if they're out there because this is a great stream this week. If you've got, Philadelphia against Kansas City, you need to sit them. Something to that effect. If you have the Steelers and you're wondering like, oh, is this actually a good defense or are they just garbage? This is a good option that is a fallback, the Dallas Cowboys against the New York Giants. Next, we have the Chicago Bears and the Detroit Lions. Chicago, Caleb Williams, I would not be trying to play him personally. Disappointing first game against Minnesota. Despite how he started, he ended it pretty poorly. I would be trying to go elsewhere personally among quarterbacks. At the running back position, DeAndre Swift, I think you can play him for this week, and he will be effective enough for you. Just because of the amount of volume that he's getting in that backfield, I think that he is playable. Kyle Monangai is an interesting stash, as well as Roschon Johnson. I think that Roschon is more likely to get some carries earlier in the season, but I think Monangai will be more involved as the season goes along because he is the guy that they brought onto this team from Ben Johnson, and he said good things about him in camp. In the wide receiver room, this is just not a great situation for me because the whole Bears offense has so many different guys they could throw it to, but nobody has stood out really as the number one. I think you can say that Rome Odunze has done that relatively, but it's not enough that I really feel great about him. There was questions earlier about Travis Hunter. I would go Travis Hunter over Rome Odunze because I just don't know what there's just too much dispersal of targets. I think there's a good chance that the Lions, they just eat up Caleb Williams in this game. They can't get the ball down the field. I think I'm really concerned about these Bears receivers as a whole. DJ Moore, I would be trying to get him off my team, not cutting him obviously, but trying to trade him away. Zacchaeus is involved, so he's really just kind of more of like a leech taking targets away from other guys who would actually roster. Luther Burden was pretty disappointing. I would not be really trying to play any of these guys, but if you had to, I would go Odunze. But I think there's even an argument where maybe I think you go Odunze over Wan'Dale Robinson just because of like the talent alone. But is he going to get the volume that you need that you may get from Wan'Dale Robinson? It's an interesting question to ask yourself. Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland. Obviously, Loveland is the one that you want to own of these two, but he was not very involved, especially relative to Kmet. I'm giving Loveland another chance, though, and not trying to cut him yet. But, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, with how well these tight ends are playing, I don't know if I would feel comfortable holding on to Colston Loveland if there's other guys like Fannin out there in these redraft leagues. It's be interesting to monitor. But the Bears, they just have too many receiving options and no clarity personally. Kyra Santos, I'm going with another kicker, and then the Bears defense, I'm not really going there either. Jared Goff, I like this as a bounce back performance from him. He did not have a good week one, and one of the downsides with him is that he doesn't give you the rushing floor that you could get from some of these other guys to help increase his value. But I do think that this offense is going to figure it out against the Bears this week. They were going up against the Packers last week. And that, I think, is just one of the defenses that you want to avoid in general for fantasy, is what it's looking like so far. Gibbs, you can play him, obviously. David Montgomery, do you play him? And that's a good question to ask. Do you play Montgomery or Swift in the same game? I probably would go Swift personally. Montgomery, though, I think you can get a good floor out of him. I would play him over the Browns running backs, as I mentioned earlier. I'd play him over Tracy. I would be doing that in this matchup. I'm suspecting Detroit's offense will figure this out this week in a matchup against Ben Johnson, going back home and all. Monroe St. Brown, I'm playing. Jameson Williams, I'd be playing. I would not be playing Khalif Raymond or Isaac Tesla. Tesla did get a touchdown this past week, but it's just off of one target, so I need to see a little bit more, but keeping my eye on him while he's on waivers. Sam Laporta, you could start him again for this week. I did like that he is getting a little bit more volume and involvement than what we've seen in years past. Full PPR, McBride or Tet McMillan. McBride, but do you have another tight end, or are you going McBride in your flex? But yeah, I would be going McBride in that matchup. I like Tet McMillan, but you can't pass up the opportunity with Trey McBride there if that's your option. But yeah, let me know who your other tight end is. I'm curious. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's something that should just be implemented in all leagues, to be honest, like doing a wide receiver tight end instead of an actual tight end. I would be going McBride, though, personally, in that matchup. Good question, Maverick. If you got anything else, just let me know in the chat. I'll stop what I'm talking about and answer what questions you have. For the Lions, Jake Bates, I would be playing, and then the Lions defense. This is a good stream option for them as well against Chicago, which looked pretty erratic in week one. Next, we have the Patriots and the Dolphins, and this is, I think, going to be a pretty underrated fantasy game for the Patriots because of what we just saw Daniel Jones do Daniel Jones and the Colts just do to the Miami Dolphins. Yeah, no problem. And like I said, if you got any other questions, just let me know, and I'm happy to answer them before these games start in about 45 minutes. Drake May. So, yeah, I'm expecting big things from Drake May in this particular game against Miami. They look like one of the worst defenses in football. good bounce back performance from him. I like this as a bounce back performance from Travion Henderson. I think he will have a good game in this particular matchup as well. We've got Ramondre Stevenson once again. He will have a bench performance. I would not be trying to play Ramondre Stevenson even despite this matchup, but I would not be surprised if he does get a touchdown in this game and gives you a pretty solid floor in the flex, but I would be trying to go somewhere else personally. So let's propose this question: Ramondre Stevenson or Dylan Sampson in full PPR? I would probably go Stevenson, but I don't feel great about it. In full PP, I mean, I think that it's safer to go Dylan Sampson in that situation, but Ramondre Stevenson, I think there's a chance he could actually be good in this particular game against Miami. Crazy as that sounds. But Henderson, I do really like. I'd be starting him for this week. Stephon Diggs, Kayshon Boutte, and Demario Douglas are the receivers for the Patriots. Diggs, I would play. I like this particular matchup. Kayshon Boutte, this is a guy that I like. He's only 23.8% rostered. I would pick him up and play him this week. I think this Miami secondary is one of the worst in the league. Boutte had 8 targets this past week, over 100 yards. I expect him doing that again. So if Boutte is out there, I would be picking up and putting him in my lineups for this particular week against the Miami Dolphins. Mac Hollins should be a presence there, but not something I'm going to play. Kyle Williams, interesting young player to keep an eye on. Can you start Hunter Henry? I think you can for this week. I think he could give you a solid floor at the tight end position, right around the top 15 range for this week. I like Hunter Henry for I like him for week 1 or sorry, week 2. I will be playing him against the Miami Dolphins. Sorry, long morning. Not playing the Patriots kicker as well as the Patriots defense. This is a good a good stream matchup. They were picked up, so they were out of that quite a bit. So they were out of that range among the under 40% roster defenses that you could stream for this week. But the Patriots might be out there in a lot of leagues, and if they are, you could play them against Miami, and I believe will give you a pretty good result as a stream option. Tua, do you want to play him against the Patriots? No, you do not want to. It is crazy to me just how far this offense has fallen just in 2 years. I saw that 70-point performance against the Broncos, and those two teams have just seemingly done a complete 180 since then. Kind of crazy. Achane I would still be playing though among the Dolphins, but I am just concerned about what is his actual rushing yard volume going to be this season, because he doesn't really have a great offensive line, and he's not really somebody that is going to give you yards after contact. I think that Achane, if he's going to make his value, it's going to be off of PPR. So if you have a standard league with Achane, I would be really worried about his value, probably trying to trade him. But you can't play him in PPR formats this week against the Patriots. This is going to tell you a lot about Achane, I think, moving forward, if he can perform in this particular matchup. Ollie Gordon is somebody that could be rostered if you have Achane, but it's looking more so like it is probably just going to be more useful for the Achane owners only. Tyreek Hill, I would feel comfortable playing him. I would not feel comfortable playing Jalen Waddle, though. I would be if you have Waddle versus Boutte in the same game, I would play Kayshon Boutte. Tyreek Hill, though, you can play. Westbrook-Ikine was pretty disappointing. I was kind of expecting he might be a little bit more involved than he was. And, yeah, that's pretty much it among all the Dolphins. I would not really be going anywhere else on this team. Next, we have the 49ers and the New Orleans Saints. Mac Jones is getting the start for the 49ers. Would you want to play him? No, I would not be playing him. Would you play him over Spencer Rattler in the same game? Probably. But that's probably it. I don't think what do you do with either Russell Wilson or Mac Jones? Could you imagine if you were in that situation? I would probably I would probably go with I would probably get in that situation. I would probably go with Russell Wilson personally over Mac Jones, but that is a real. You'd have to be real desperate and in some kind of super flex league to do that. But yeah, Mac Jones, I think will be. He. I don't know if he will kill you necessarily in this game, but it's going to be more so a Christian McCaffrey game where he is going to be heavily involved. This is going to be a low scoring game in my opinion, where it should be very heavily dominated by the 49ers defense. I think it's going to be kind of similar to what we saw in the Seattle matchup, where it's just going to be a slog. And if you're going to be in PPR, then McCaffrey is going to have a great game. Some of these receivers, I think, will give you a good volume of targets, like Ricky Pearsall in particular. The rest of the guys, though, I'm a little bit worried about on this particular team. Check if Brian Robinson is there. He's a good handcuff to have for McCaffrey, especially considering all these injuries that this team has had already this season. Ricky Pearsall, you can play this week, despite having Mac Jones at quarterback. Juwan Jennings, I would not be playing. I would not be playing the other collection of receivers, Kendrick Bourne, Russell Gage, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Sky Moore. Those guys would be on waivers for me. Jake Tonjes, I don't love this option. If you're in deep leagues and you're trying to replace Kittle, you could always give him a shot, but I would be trying to go more so Jawan Johnson among waiver options if he is out there versus trying to go for Tonjes on the same team. Eddie Pinheiro is replacing Jake Moody, who really fell apart. I think you could play him this week, but there's other better kicker options. And then the 49ers defense, this is one of the better defenses, I think, going into this week against Spitzer Rattler and the Saints. Rattler, I would be sitting. He's, again, somebody I would sit behind Mac Jones and Russell Wilson, probably the 32nd quarterback in fantasy for this particular week. Alvin Kamara, I would play. But again, I mean, it's kind of like this game is just going to be like almost, I feel like, just exactly what we saw in Seattle from week one, where these teams are just going to be like beating up on each other the whole game. And it's really not going to be super high scoring, in my opinion. Chris Olave, I would be trying to go elsewhere personally. He's already got injured again in week one. Just not looking great for him. Rashid Shaheed, I would be sitting him for the time being. I would still probably roster him, though, to see how this situation develops with the targets. It's really between Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Juwan Johnson in terms of guys that could realistically be the top receiving target for Rattler on this team. And, yeah, I think they're all guys I would roster, but I would play Juwan Johnson, but I would not play the other two receivers personally. And then Brandon Cooks and Devon Villay should not be rostered either. Blake Groupie, I would be trying to go elsewhere. And then the Saints defense, it's an interesting option. They're 1% owned. They're playing Mac Jones. Maybe he turns the ball over and they got a pick six. If you're looking at under 10% rostered defenses, this could be an option for you. It's not great, but, you know, it is an option. Next, we have the Bills and the Jets. We'll try to work a little bit quicker to get through these 1 o'clock games. Josh Allen, I would be playing this week, obviously. Shouldn't have had that much of a pause, but you're locking Josh Allen in. You're locking James Cook in. Ray Davis, I would roster as James Cook's handcuff personally. Can you play Keon Coleman? I think that you could. I am a little bit concerned of, we haven't really seen a lot of sample of consistent performance here and there. So Keon Coleman, I would be putting into my flex, but I would not be expecting a great game like what we saw in week two, or in week one against Buffalo. If he does go off again, though, this puts him into must-start consideration moving forward. Question from Steven. PPR, 2 flex spots. DJ Moore, Waddle, Kenneth Walker, or Cup. Currently with DJ Moore and deciding between Waddle and Walker. I would go with Walker personally. I'm very concerned about Jalen Waddle this season. Just that offense is not in sync. And if you are, and to me, I think he's the third receiving option on that team after Tyreek Hill and Achane. So I would be going Kenneth Walker. Cup to me is he could have some good value in this game, but I think Walker, there's a better chance of him getting good receiving and rushing volume together that I would go with K9 in that matchup personally. But yeah, let me know if you have any other questions, Steven, if you're thinking about some other guys in that range. Question from Andy. Full PPR, Tony Pollard or Warren RB2? I would go Tony Pollard personally. I know that he did not have a good performance week 1, but I do feel that there's just a better chance of him getting the majority of volume on that team. I would probably go Tony Pollard over Jalen Warren, personally speaking. I think there's a real chance that Jalen Warren, he got a touchdown last week, but if he did not get that touchdown, he would have had a pretty disappointing performance. You may see Kenneth Gainwell involved quite a bit. Maybe they might get Caleb Johnson involved. I think there could be some risk with that. I would go with Tony Pollard, where he's pretty much locked in as the guy getting all the carries on that team. If you guys got any other questions, ask them below, and I will get to them right away because we got about a half hour before game day. But great question, Andy and Steven. Thank you for your comments. No problem, Andy. Happy to help. And like always, if you got anything else, just drop it in the chat below. Yeah, Coleman, I would play in my flex this week. Khalil Shakir in the full PPR leagues, he's in consideration to play. Josh Palmer, no. Dalton Kincaid, he got a touchdown this past week, but I am a little bit more skeptical about his consistency. I would be going with other tight ends personally, like the Juwan Johnsons mentioned earlier, like Brenton Strange, guys that are available on waivers that you could stream over him. I think they have better matchups and just better consistency of targets personally. Matt Prater, highly available kicking option that you could play this week. He's only 31.9% rostered. He's a good kicker to pick up that you could start in your lineup against the Jets this today. Buffalo defense. I would be playing Buffalo despite what we saw from the Jets offense for one, and despite what we saw the Ravens do to them this past week. I think you could put Buffalo back in your lineup because Justin Fields did look great, but there's also a real argument that he falls on his face today. So and that leads me to him into this next matchup. I would want to play Justin Fields because we saw that elite type of rushing upside of what we have been hoping for him throughout his career. I would want to play Justin Fields personally if you can, but I do feel that there is risk involved with this though, because he has been kind of erratic at times, and this Bills defense, despite getting lit up by Lamar Jackson this past week, is actually pretty solid. Still, that being said, I would play Justin Fields if you have him. Breece Hall, now he's back into start consideration too. I would play Breece Hall. I would start him over the guys that I've mentioned earlier, like Tyrone Tracy, like Dylan Sampson, guys like that. I would prefer ETN, though, with that matchup against Cincinnati personally. But Breece Hall, this is a good matchup for him too. And like I've said, if you guys got any questions, ask them in this chat. This is specifically designed to answer your questions. I'm going through all the matchups, but if you want to ask your own questions, doesn't have to be start sit. It could be about roster management, etc. Just ask in the chat below, and I will get to them first and foremost. You got any trade questions? Any like dynasty, like what I think about ranking people versus one versus another, stuff like that. Just ask them in the chat. Next question, should I drop KC defense for any of these Buffalo, Arizona, Detroit? Well, Kansas City is playing the Giants in week 3, so I would be trying to hold them if you can. Do you have anybody else that you can drop? Because you want to have them in week 3 against the New York Giants. They're going to be a top 5 defense. I wouldn't just put them out there on waivers personally, but I would not be trying to play them against the Eagles. Arizona, I believe, gets Carolina, so that would be a pretty good option that you can get as well. But who else could you potentially drop to just stream Arizona this week and keep KC? So yeah, let me know what your other options are. The guys you could drop are. Braylon Allen is worth rostering still, despite the fact that Breece Hall has pretty significantly outpaced him so far in terms of carries and yardage, etc. Garrett Wilson, I liked him a lot going into the season. Kincaid or Andrews? That is tough. Are those your only two tight ends? Do you have three tight ends, or are those the two on your bench? Garrett Wilson is somebody that you could start again this week. I think he's going to be pretty much locked in as a starter every week. The rest of the receivers are pretty much not a threat. Mason Taylor is the tight end in New York, and he's somebody that I like to, get more involved as the season goes along, but I'm not playing him for this particular week. But he's a very underrated tight end. ACYL, if those are your only two guys that you can cut, then I think I would probably drop Andrews to hold on to the KC defense for week 3 and then go with Arizona. Especially if you do have 3 tight ends. But if those are your only two, then it kind of changes things a little bit. Do you have any other position? Do you have 2 kickers or 2 quarterbacks or something like that? I would probably, in that case, hold KC, drop Andrews, and then pick up Arizona is what I would recommend to you. Nick Folk, you could go elsewhere among the Jets, or among kickers. I don't think this is a great matchup necessarily. And then the Jets defense, Josh Allen, you're not playing them at all. Seattle and Pittsburgh. We have 2 more games left among the 1 o'clock slate, and then we will get to the evening games. Sam Darnold, I would try to be going elsewhere. Pretty disappointing first game. I do think he will turn it around eventually, though, but he didn't really get off to the best start in this particular matchup against San Francisco, and he gets kind of a tough defense with Pittsburgh. We'll see how he does today. This is a game where I'm really curious to see if Pittsburgh is actually a good defense or if they're just because we expected them to do well against the Jets, and we expect them to do well against the Seahawks. If they don't do well in either of those 2 games, with games upcoming still against the Ravens and Cincinnati twice, then we're going to be viewing them a lot differently. Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet, these are not options that I love necessarily, but I would be comfortable with Walker in PPR and Charbonnet if you're in standard. But there are some better options, like if there's an ETN available that you can go with in that situation, I would go Travis Etienne personally. Breece Hall earlier mentioned, I would go with him over those guys. But Walker, I think, is going to be serviceable enough that you could play in this game. Jackson Smith and Jigba is one of the most heavily targeted receivers from what we've seen in week 1. And this is a guy that I would definitely be trying to play for this particular week against Pittsburgh. I loved him going into the season. He's got top 10 upside with potentially getting into the top 5. So, yeah, you could play him again for this week. Cooper Kupp, probably sit him. This is going to really tell you a lot about him. Again, if this Pittsburgh defense is actually legit, then it's going to be interesting to see Seattle offense, Pittsburgh defense. Are either of these units good? Because it's going to swing one way or the other, and that's going to drastically change the way we view either the Pittsburgh defense moving forward or the Seattle offense. The tight end situation in Seattle is one of the worst in the league. Arroyo is the one to look at, the rookie there. Otherwise, not much interest there. Jason Myers, excuse me. I think you could play him for this particular week. Not a great option, though. Seattle defense, I would be trying to avoid, even though I do like that defensive unit. Can you play Aaron Rodgers off of this, resurgent 4-touchdown performance that we saw? I would personally not want to. I think that Seattle is kind of a better defense than what we saw from the Jets. So I would be trying to sit Aaron Rodgers in this matchup, but I am intrigued to see if he can replicate what he did. Jaylen Warren, Kenneth Gainwell, Caleb Johnson. I've been trying to go elsewhere with all 3 of them personally. I think you would probably play Warren over Dylan Sampson, for example, but there was a question earlier about whether or not you'd go with Jaylen Warren or Travis Hunter. And I would go Travis Hunter in that situation. And then Tony Pollard or Jalen Warren, I would go Tony Pollard. So, I mean, he's in that like flex consideration range to me, but there's a lot of murkiness still with this backfield that I want to see sorted out. DK Metcalf, kind of a disappointing first game in Pittsburgh, but up against his former team, I'm expecting kind of a revenge game for him where he has a pretty good performance. Calvin Austin, I think you could play him again if you're in the deep league flexes. But again, if it's Calvin Austin or Wan'Dale Robinson, I would go Wan'Dale Robinson because of what I think will be a pretty solid floor among receptions for Wan'Dale. Jonnu Smith, Pat Freiermuth. Long term, I like Jonnu Smith a little bit more, but there are better tight ends that you can get out there than these guys, particularly guys mentioned earlier, Jawan Johnson, Britton Strange, a good stream candidate. Harold Fannin, I would probably go over these guys. So, yeah. Chris Boswell, great kicker that you could play seemingly every week. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, I would sit them personally. I know that they get Seattle and they didn't really look great necessarily against San Francisco, but I'm a little concerned with Pittsburgh. I would be trying to go somewhere else if you can. Last 1 o'clock game, we've got the Rams and the Titans. I would sit Matt Stafford. You saw him put up a solid performance by his standards, but he's generally at this point in his career hovering around like 12 to 18 fantasy points. Not anything special. I think this Titans defense is actually pretty underrated. They did well against Bo Nix this past week. I'm expecting, you could, if you're looking at Stafford or Flacco, I would go Flacco personally. Kyron Williams, you could play him. Blake Corum, hold him if you have him as the handcuff for Kyron Williams. You're playing Puka Nacua. In this particular game, I think you could play Devontae Adams as well and get pretty good results from that. I would be putting him into my flex. I'd probably play Travis Hunter or Devontae Adams. I would probably go Hunter over Adams, but I think there are Devontae Adams is still one of the better options that you could have as a wide receiver 2 or 3 for this week. Not looking at Tutu, Atwell, Whittington, those guys. The tight end position here is interesting because Terrence Ferguson is the one that we all kind of want to get involved over Tyler Higbee, and it didn't really look that way so far to start this season. But still, that's the better long-term option to have. Higbee probably better short-term, but there are a lot of better tight ends that you could look for that I would not be trying to go that direction. Josh Carty against the Titans, I think you can play him for this week and you can get solid results. And this Rams defense looked great against the Texans. This is one of the best just individual defensive matchups that you have on the week. The Titans and the Rams. I would be definitely starting the Rams against Tennessee this week. So we got about 22 minutes before kickoff. So if you got any last-minute questions, ask them below. Priority is going to your questions, so ask them if you got them. Cam Ward, and it doesn't have to be start-sit. It could be any type of roster construction type stuff about your team. Just what I think about certain players, etc. Just ask them in the chat. Cam Ward, I'm sitting. I haven't given up hope on him despite how week 1 went because that was against the Broncos, which looked like a good defense. And this is another tough matchup for Ward here. So don't really want to play him, but still I'm rostering him and holding out hope that he could be very good for fantasy as we end the season. From TS, Murray or Fields? This is actually a question that I have personally on one of my teams, and I'm going with Fields. Reason being is because I just feel like there is a more consistent floor that you're getting with Justin Fields in terms of his rushing capabilities. Kyler Murray, he runs around, but he doesn't really run up the field very consistently. And I know that they get Carolina, which, that's should be a good matchup on paper, but Trevor Lawrence was kind of disappointing against them in what we saw in week 1. So in a game against Buffalo where I'm expecting that the Jets will be losing that one and Fields will have quite a bit of opportunity to try to come back in that game, and they're going to be aggressive trying to get him into open space to generate offense. I think that Justin Fields, I would prefer to go him over Kyler Murray. It is a risk. I mean, like you said, it is a risk, but I just feel like there's higher upside with Justin Fields in this particular matchup against against Buffalo, that I would go him over Kyler Murray personally. Great question. Like I said, I actually had that same thought process in one of my leagues where I have both those two players. If you got anything else, just let me know in the chat as well. Next, we were on Tennessee, Tony Pollard. I think he's a good play for this week. It's not a high upside performance, but I am expecting it to be top 20 to 25 range for Tony Pollard. Calvin Ridley, can you play him? I really like Calvin Ridley going into the season because he is one of the few targets that they have on that team with experience, and he should be the hypothetical wide receiver 1. But he dropped so many passes this past week. He did have Surtain on him this past week 1, though, so that's something to consider there. If you're desperate, you can go Calvin Ridley. I would probably go him over like the Wan'Dale Robinsons and all those guys. I'd prefer to leave him on my bench, though, if you can. Alec Aomanor is an interesting player to keep an eye on. To have as Aomanor is not somebody that you're going to want to be playing right away, but he got 7 targets in this first week. And I think we'll continue to get heavily involved. Already more targets than Tyler Lockett got. So that's a good sign for the rookie receiver. Untame, Drake or Baker? So I'm assuming this is like a super flex question of whether or not to start Drake London or Baker Mayfield. Is that right? Who are your other receivers if that's your super flex? I love Drake London personally. I don't think I would ever want to sit him. Baker is Drake or Baker? Oh, Drake May. Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Drake London. Okay. No, I would go with Baker Mayfield personally. I do like Drake May still, and I think this is a great matchup for him against Miami, but I think that Baker Mayfield is top 5 potential quarterback just on the season, and he's definitely in the top 10. So I think it's safer to go Baker Mayfield personally. But Drake May, this is a good matchup for him. So those are both good options. But I would. There's a good chance that the other way you could spin it with the Patriots is that Drake May has a poor performance because the Patriots just get up on them running the ball and they don't need to throw it as much. That is an option. Whereas with the Buccaneers and the Texans, that should be a competitive game throughout, and Baker Mayfield will be heavily involved. So I would go Baker Mayfield personally. Oh, yeah. That is a good point. If you are trying to play comeback and you're going for the highest upside you can, then I probably would go Drake May because you got to make up all those points from JCM. So yeah. In that case, shoot for the moon because Drake May, I think, has a higher upside personally than Baker Mayfield in that game. The Texans have a good defense as well. So yeah, I'd go Drake May then and see if you can replicate that same Daniel Jones performance. That's a good point there. And that's something to consider as well, just with a lot of these start-sit decisions, is like, what is your projection versus your opponent? Because that dictates a lot. Like, see if your opponent, like if you have, like, let's say that like your opponent has, like if you have a Buka and your opponent has like Baker Mayfield or something like that, and you're considering a Buka versus another really good receiver, then wait. So are you saying that you have built? Well, I'm confused. Are you saying that you played Krosky Merritt, or are you saying that he that you played him the first week? But I'm curious if you played him or if your opponent played him. If you're I think that like if you're trying to make up, basically what I'm saying is that if you're trying to, okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, basically my point, if you're going for the high upside swing, then go Drake May. If you're going for the safe play, then go Baker Mayfield. That's what I would personally do. If you're still projected to win and he played and your opponent played Krosky Merritt, then maybe you do want to play Baker Mayfield. But if you personally want to go with a more high upside to try to keep up with Josh Allen, because Josh Allen is probably going to exceed his projected points. I'm just telling you that. So if you do want to go with the high upside play, then go with Drake May. But if you want to go safe, then go Baker Mayfield. Sorry, I kind of got a little confused on that. I thought you were saying that you played Krosky Merritt and that you needed to make up the points. But yeah, thanks for clarifying that, though. And if you got any other questions, just let me know in the chat. For those of you in here, if you got any other questions, those will take precedence over the games that I'll be talking about here. Can you play Joey Sly for the Titans? He had a good kicking performance in week 1, and I think he's a good name to monitor because he's always had a good leg. I think that he is going to be relevant again this week against the Rams, and he's somebody that you could play in a pinch. You're worried about K9 at flex. I would be too. Who else do you have as an option there? Titans defense. I think they're an underrated defense. I wouldn't play them this week against the Titans or against the Rams, though. I would be trying to go elsewhere. We go now to the 4 o'clock games. We'll move a little bit quicker to kind of get through those particular matchups. We got Bryce Young for the Carolina Panthers. I would be sitting him. Oh, yeah, that's too bad. Well, at least the bright side, though, is that you could do that moving forward, though. I think that that's definitely a situation that I mean, hindsight's 2020, obviously, but that's a great play you could have moving forward is you do double tight end with Kraft and Warren, because I like both those guys. Who are your other options between K9 that you could play for this week, though? Chuba Hubbard is somebody that you could play again for this week. Despite the Arizona matchup, they played pretty well against Alvin Kamara, but I do think Hubbard is going to give you enough rushing volume that he should be serviceable for you. But he doesn't give you the upside of somebody like a Travis Etienne against Cincinnati, for example. So if you have Hubbard and you're trying to get Etienne in last minute, I would make that switch. McMillan, you can play this week. I like that he got 9 targets. It wasn't a great stat line, but still, Tedero McMillan is the guy here. And then Leggett, Renfro, those are guys to monitor. But it really, to me, the one to have is Tedero McMillan. And then the other 2 receivers between Leggett and Renfro are people that could be on waivers and you could probably pick up and stash in deep leagues only. Golden and Dobbs, but kept them benched. Yeah. You probably are you a Packers fan? I'm just curious because you have a lot of Packers I see. I think it would probably be beneficial to try to trade Dobbs off of this performance that he had this past week. I'm a little bit just lower on his upside. I think if you're going to go with 2 Packers, it would be Kraft and Golden. Golden, to me, I think has the best chance of actually being the top tight end, or excuse me, the top receiving option there. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, but still, either way, I would try to trade Dobbs off of a pretty good performance like this and try to see if you can get somebody that could be a little bit more consistent. I mean, go for Boutte on your own team, man. I think he's going to be a pretty underrated sleeper. Although I do think he is going to go off today, so you may not be able to pull that off after week 2. But still, like I would be trying to see. That's what I would recommend you try to do, is try to trade Dobbs, even out your split of different teams going into this week. But if you don't really have a lot of other options than Kenneth Walker at flex, I think that's not bad. It's just I am concerned because that backfield split is already 50-50. And I think long term it's going to trend towards Charbonnet being the guy. Question from Hayden. Tyler Warren, Bowers, JMO, or Diggs? Pick 2 for PPR. So this is a are you trying to also fill the tight end? Because what I would probably do, to be honest with you, is put Warren in at tight end. And then if Bowers doesn't play, you should probably, you obviously want to play Bowers if he's healthy. And it's looking like he will be healthy. But I would recommend what you do is to try to find somebody playing on the Monday night that you can put in for Bowers. So if he's healthy, then you would go Tyler Warren and Bowers is what I would personally do. But you got to be careful because if you don't have any players playing on Monday night, and there's not really good options on the waivers, then you need to look somewhere else is what I'd recommend. So Hayden, let me know if there are guys that you have as fallback options that could play Monday night if Bowers doesn't play, but I would probably go Tyler Warren and Bowers. You could also, Jameson Williams is also a good consideration as well. So that's somebody there, but I like Warren and Bowers of that group. Untamed, it's a 12-teamer, so no major trades. I can upgrade with, but like week 5, there's going to be some options. Well, yeah, you never know. I mean, people are always like willing to make. I know like certain leagues are like people don't trade, people trade often, etc. It kind of depends on the crowd you're with, but there's going to be it never hurts to just put things out there and just see if people like bite at the options, like if they like those certain trades that offers that you have. I would recommend just seeing what you can get. If you have ideas that you're thinking of, just ask me. I love helping you guys out with all your questions. So if you got any type of that's a that's a pretty good team name there. So back to LB's question. So yeah, if you guys got any questions, just ask below. I'm happy to, or subscribe to the channel, ask your questions in my chat. In my videos, I reply to all my commenters and try to give you as detailed of answers as I can. So please take advantage of that and subscribe if you're new here. LB, May, Nix, or A-Rod. In terms of the highest upside, it would be Drake May. I'm a little disappointed with what I saw from Bo Nix, but I do think that is your best option long term. I would probably go with May of that group, but if you want to play it more safe, I would go with Bo Nix personally. Aaron Rodgers, I'm a little concerned if that is a fluke because I think Seattle's defense is a lot better than what we saw from New York. And a lot of that is too, like a lot of revenge factor from Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he just spent all of his energy week 1. I don't know if that's actually that's probably a little bit hyperbolic, but still, I think that I would go Drake May of that group, then Bo Nix, then Aaron Rodgers. PPR flex pick 1: Judy, Keenan, Tet, and Javonte. I would go. That's a tough question. What I would personally do is I would go Judy 1. I think that they're going to be heavily relying on him to stay competitive in that game. Then I would pretty much go in the order that you have. I would go Keenan next, then Tet McMillan, then Javonte Williams. I think that you could really get serviceable results from both Keenan Allen and Tet McMillan. Javonte Williams, though, that's pretty clearly somebody out of the picture for me in PPR. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good situation to be in to have all those options at PPR for you. But I would be going Jerry Jeudy personally. All right. If you guys got any other questions, just let me know. We'll continue through a little bit more as we're leading up to game day. And once again, subscribe if you got any questions. If you want to see more videos like this moving forward, subscribe, ask your questions in the chat. And I'll be coming out with a week 3 prep video coming up in about 24 hours that will give you a view of guys that you can pick up on waivers, trade candidates, etc., heading into week 3 with all the results of week 2 factored in. So back to the Cardinals and Panthers. Pretty much said everything I needed to about the Carolina Panthers. Kyler Murray, to me, is a play. I don't love him as much as Justin Fields, which was a question earlier. James Conner, I would play him for this week. Trey Benson, no. Marvin Harrison Jr., I would play him. I think that's I like that he has gotten a little bit more involved this season. I still feel like this is Trey McBride as the number 1 receiving target here. But Marvin Harrison is encouraging performance in week 1. Michael Wilson is in consideration in deep leagues, but you got to be pretty deep for that. Should I trade Charbonnet for Kyler Murray? Well, it depends on who your other quarterbacks are. I think in a vacuum, that's a good trade, though, because Charbonnet is in a timeshare with Kenneth Walker. So, yeah, I mean, are your quarterbacks like May, Nix, and Aaron Rodgers? Because in that case, I think you might just be better holding on to Bo Nix and trying to get your I do feel Bo Nix will turn that around. Yeah, I mean, if you are going to trade Charbonnet for I would try to look for somebody else personally. I mean, if you could get like a Justin Fields, I think Justin Fields gives you like pretty high upside that you're not getting from any of the players that you currently have, and even with Kyler. So who are your other running backs too? I'm just curious on that as well. Back to the Cardinals and Panthers. McBride, you're playing. Chad Ryland, this is a good stream opportunity for him. And then the Arizona Cardinals, this is a good defense that you could stream as well. The Broncos and the Colts. I think Bo Nix will have a better game this week. LB asked a question earlier about May or Nix, though. I would go Drake May given the matchup. J.K. Dobbins, I would be cautiously playing him. I don't feel excited about it. RJ Harvey, you could play him if you also are desperate, but these are not really the best options to me because they're splitting the work. The Colts run defense is pretty good. I think that there's a lot of risk in this. McCaffrey, Ken Walker, Benson, Swift, and Charbonnet. So what I would do personally is I would be trying to trade Ken Walker. I think you can get a little bit more from him than Zach Charbonnet. I think that Charbonnet is the better option long-term on your team. So I would probably look around at some better options that you can get for Ken Walker. I think there's ways that you could parlay that potentially into a running back that has better long-term value for you. Because I think that beyond, if your running back 2 is in the consideration of Swift and Charbonnet, then you probably need an upgrade a little bit is what I would say. So maybe look and see what you can get in terms of like, can you get one of those Browns running backs like Judkins? I think Judkins could be an upgrade over Kenneth Walker, especially if you package it with like Ken Walker for Judkins plus another receiver or something. That's what I would recommend you try to do. The other Broncos players, Cortland Sutton, you're playing. Marvin Mims, I would not play this week. Same with Troy Franklin. I like these guys in terms of they're interesting to see if they get more involved as the season progresses, but not a lot of better options out. Not a lot of guys that I think these are not guys that I think there are people that you could play. There's better options out there for me personally. I would sit Evan Ingram, calf injury plus kind of not really super involved this past game. It's to me Sutton, and then the rest of the guys are DFS plays for the Broncos this week. Will Lutz, This is an interesting matchup for him. I think he's worth considering to play. And then the Broncos defense, if you got them, you've got the best defense in the league, and you're playing them every time they take the field, basically. Daniel Jones, this is a good stash considering how he played in week 1, but I would not be playing him week 2 against this Broncos defense. Jonathan Taylor, you play him, but you don't feel great about it. DJ Giddens should be rostered as the handcuff for Jonathan Taylor, as I recommended earlier. This is a great handcuff that a lot of people don't really consider. Tajay Spears is good to have in IR, though, just because I do feel that he is going to eventually this season become the number 1 running back in Tennessee. So hold on to him there. That's a good option for you later on this season, but kind of you got to be patient with him. You could play Michael Pittman. Josh Downs, I would not want to play, though. I feel that more than likely the Surtain matchup is going to be drawn to either of these two. The best receiving option is going to be Tyler Warren. Even though it is against the Broncos, I would probably go Tyler. I would still feel good about Tyler Warren just as the tight end that gets plenty of involvement and should have a good game. He got 8 targets his first game of the year, and I think that's only just going to keep going up. I really love Tyler Warren in general, as I've mentioned quite a bit on this channel. That is a good question, Ray. Andrews or Hunter Henry in PPR? I would go with Hunter Henry. Andrews he's got a pretty tough matchup against Andrews was just not very involved in that 40-point game. Hunter Henry, though, has a great matchup with Miami. So if you can make that switch, I would put Hunter Henry in your starting lineup, play the stream. I like Andrews more long-term, but I would not be playing him right now. You have Rice, Worthy, and Ayuk along with A.J. Brown. So I'm streaming wide receivers for the time being. Yeah, that's a tough situation to be in. Check if Kayshon Boutte is available for you. I mentioned him earlier. He's only 23.8% roster. That's somebody that you could pick up and play. Probably too late now with the 1 o'clock games going by. You could also look to see if Hollywood Brown is there. See if Darnell Mooney is out there. That's another guy you could consider. Tyrone Thornton. Those are like pretty good options. Or I'm sorry, Dante Thornton Jr. for the Vegas Raiders. Those are good stream options that you could look at for this particular week. Pretty much said all I had to say about the Colts and the Broncos. We have the Eagles and Chiefs. This is the game of the week in terms of NFL. Fantasy, though, maybe not. Jalen Hurts, you're playing. Saquon, you're playing. Really interested to see how involved Tank Bigsby is early on. If he's going to actually be the full-time RB2 or if it's going to be kind of split with everybody else. Because A.J. Dillon there as well. We'll see how that works. Will Shipley not expected to play. A.J. Brown, I would play in this game. Devontae Smith, I'd be trying to go elsewhere personally. I think there are better options that you could go with than Smith. Sounds crazy, but I'd probably go Calvin Ridley over Devontae Smith personally. Just because I know Calvin Ridley is going to be a number 1 wide receiver on that team. Devontae Smith could very well be phased out, kind of like what happened in week 1. Dotson got involved in some plays against the Cowboys opening night, but he's not going to be somebody I'm looking at here. Goddard is out. So Grant Calcaterra is usually pretty effective when he does start for Goddard, but I would not be going Calcaterra because there's a lot of other better tight end options for me personally. Jake Elliott, I would be playing, and the Eagles defense, I would be trying to sit against Kansas City. Not a great matchup, but the Eagles defense I do like long term. DeMario Douglas, Franklin, and Juju. So, yeah, that's not the best situation personally. What are your current receivers that you have that are like who would you switch out like Juju or Troy Franklin for? It may be better to just stay with what you have then in that case. Juju is interesting for PPR purposes, though, especially since both Worthy and Rice are out. That would be a name I would actually probably consider there are the two of them. But Troy Franklin, I think, has a little bit better long-term potential than Juju. Mahomes had a pretty good first game in week one. I a little skeptical of it. I think he's going to be a tough sell to play this week against Philadelphia, but you generally don't have a lot of other better options. May is probably a better start over Patrick Mahomes. I would be avoiding this whole backfield, but if you are looking for a desperate option that's under 40% rostered, it would be Kareem Hunt. He is somebody that you could plug in and potentially be able to give you a productive performance. If you don't really have a lot of other better options in your backfield. Like if you're looking at Hunt or Nick Chubb, what do you do there? I would probably go Nick Chubb, but Kareem Hunt is kind of in that same tier of guys right now. You're starting May with Douglas, Juju, A.J. Brown. Yeah, I think that's probably the best situation personally. Troy Franklin is somebody to monitor, to keep an eye on. Maybe you put him on your bench, but he's not somebody that I think that you need to roster necessarily. That's probably the best thing you can do. Yeah, I hope Demario Douglas could be a little bit better than what we've seen. He has had some good flashes at times, but you got a touchdown this past week, but then came up with net negative yards. Kind of a pretty weird stat line. For the Chiefs receivers, you could play Hollywood Brown this week. I think anytime he has the guy with 16 targets and you don't have a lot of other receiving options there that are healthy, that's somebody that you should play every week. So Hollywood Brown is a start for this week. Juju, he's not a great start, but he's one of the better. It's not a bad option, especially in PPR. So if you're desperate, like LB, who has commented about needing to stream guys because of the injuries with Worthy, Ayuk, Rice, then that's probably one of the better options that you can have aside from to play Juju. Tyrone Thornton, or he is a stream. Tyquan Thornton is a stream candidate to just keep an eye on in this game. Not expecting big things though. Travis Kelce, I think you can play him. He usually does well in these like high profile games, although he was shut out by this team in the Super Bowl pretty much. So I mean, he's really more of a sell high candidate than anything because he hasn't really looked great so far this season. But yeah, Travis Kelce probably can play him this week. Don't really love him long term though. We got 3 games which we'll power through in the next like 5 minutes. Michael Penix is a good start for this week against Minnesota. Not a great one, but still solid. Bijan Robinson, he gets the nod here at running back, and he is going to be a pretty much locked-in starter every single week. Drake London, disappointing first game, but he did have 15 targets, and I suspect that he will be once again excellent for fantasy and one of the best receivers that you can have in fantasy football. Darnell Mooney is in a situation where you could probably play him this week if he's available. Came back a lot earlier than we expected. That's great news for him personally and for this team. Ray-Ray McLeod was in that discussion of guys, but now that Mooney is back, probably sitting him or putting him on waivers. Kyle Pitts, can he get the same amount of targets that he got this past week and stay relevant in fantasy? Because he's a very tantalizing talent. People love him. We'll see what happens, though. Parker Romo getting the nod over Younghoe Koo. I would be sitting him, though. And then the Atlanta Falcons defense, I would not be wanting to play against Minnesota just because I think there's just better matchups. J.J. McCarthy looked terrible for the first 3 quarters. It looked excellent in the fourth quarter. I think there are better options that you can go with personally. I'd probably go Penix in the same game. The Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones split is another interesting one to monitor, much like Charbonnet and the Steelers situation, and Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker in the Seahawks situation. Mason I like more long term, but they're both staying relevant enough that they have value to both play. as flexes. Justin Jefferson locked in. Adam Thielen, you could play him. This is an option to consider potentially if you're in those late game windows needing a Bowers replacement. But ultimately, I think that it's better to just go with Adam Thielen's probably better off on benches. TJ Hawkinson, looking for a good performance here. Otherwise, we're going to have some concerns, but I would still be playing him for his talent alone. Will Reichert, playable, but not a great option. And then the Vikings defense, solid defense. This is a good time to play them, but not expecting big things. The Monday night games, we got Baker Mayfield, who I'd be starting. Bucky Irving starting. Rachaad White handcuffed with Bucky Irving. We have Mike Evans, Emeka Buka. Both those two guys I would be playing in this particular game. Sterling Shepard, no. We also have Cade Otton. I would not be playing Cade Otton in this game. It's pretty much, to me, it's Evans, it's Ibuka, and then it's a bunch of guys that could be getting targets here and there. Otton will be interesting in matchups where they have great their poor defenses against tight ends, but I would not be trying to go with him in this particular game. Chase McLaughlin missed an extra point, but I think this is a good matchup here against Houston in a dome where he should have a pretty good performance. The Bucs defense, I would be not trying to play it because it's a late window, but this will tell a lot about the Houston Texans offense if they can move the ball against the Bucs, or if they can't, because then that will kind of dictate a lot of how we feel about these players going throughout the rest of the season. I'm sitting Stroud. I think if you have a choice between Stroud and Geno Smith on Monday night, I would be going Geno Smith there. Nick Chubb, I would play, but I don't feel great about it. I would try to go with somebody that has a little bit more PPR upside. So between Nick Chubb and like Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, I'd probably go the two Vikings running backs over Nick Chubb. Nico Collins, I'm playing. Despite the poor performance in week one, I think he'll be just fine. Jaden Higgins, I'd bench him, but this is a good receiver to monitor moving forward. Who should have plenty of opportunity. Dalton Schultz, I would play. If you are desperate, there are other tight ends that are better options, but if you're looking for that Bowers replacement, like I said, I think you can use Dalton Schultz should Brock Bowers not be available. Kaimi Fairbairn is one of the better kickers that you can have for fantasy, in my opinion. And he's also on a Monday night, which gives you that Monday night trick that I talked about. If you're interested, subscribe to the channel, learn more about it. And the Texans defense, I think you can play them cautiously, though. Last game of the day, and then we'll sign off for the games. We've got Justin Herbert. You can start him against the Vegas Raiders. I think this will be another good Herbert performance, and then you may want to look to sell him after two excellent games. Amari and Hampton, I like this as a bounce-back performance. Check if Najee Harris is available as a handcuff for Hampton because he's getting dropped in a lot of places. I think you could play McConkey and Keenan Allen in this game. Quentin Johnston, I would be trying to sit, though. I know that he just had that great performance, but I still feel like there are better options overall. Not playing either Will Disley or Tyler Conklin in this game. For the Chargers tight ends, Cam Dicker, yes, and Chargers defense, no. Geno Smith playing. This should be a pretty high-scoring game Monday night. It should be a good close of the week, hopefully. Ashton Genty, I feel comfortable about putting him back in. I know that he didn't look great necessarily in the first game, but you love that he did get 18 carries and the next guy got 1. I mean, the backups are Raheem Mostert and Zamir White. So to be honest, like Genty will be just fine, even though this performance was not great. I do think he's going to be just fine and will be somebody that you should definitely start for this week. Jacoby Myers, this is a great flex consideration player that you could start on Monday night at that wide receiver position. Dante Thornton Jr. should be rostered for his potential. You've got Brock Bowers potentially playing, looking like he will. If he is, he's definitely starting. If he does not play and you're really in a pinch, you find out like the hour before the game, then Michael Mayer is not a bad fallback option. Daniel Carlson, Great kicker to stream this week, and it gives you the Monday night trick that, again, I talked about. If you're interested, subscribe and I'll explain it. Or you can rewind a little bit in this video where I kind of talk about it a little bit. And the Raiders defense, I'd be sitting. That's all we've got for the first slate of that week 2 games. We will come back with some more fantasy football content after the games today. I will be releasing a video with week 3 previews of the waivers, buy low and sell high candidates, as well as a lot of other content. So you can check that out in the description below. Thank you for all those who tuned in today and asked questions. And we'll keep this rolling on a week-by-week basis. So subscribe to the channel, and thank you for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.